Okay, this is chapter 7 of my book, Avoirdupois, A Life of Weight. The one area of her occupational life in which she might be free to act, the area of her own personality, must become the alert yet obsequious instrument by which goods are distributed. Weight Watchers was founded in 1963. 500,000 people signed up in droves, and the company registered $5.5 million in revenue. In 1965, the average fashion model weighed 8% less than the average American woman. I became a preteen at a time when the notion of preteen was a newly realized market in that market economy. I bought new magazines aimed at girls in my age cohort, filled with pictures of the Beatles, fashion advice, and diets. The magazines were instruction manuals on how to belong. But I couldn't buy the clothes because they didn't come in my size. It seemed to me that if I were ever going to break out of my fat girl at the edge of the schoolyard identity, I would need to lose weight. The magazine had a plan. I hung a page on the refrigerator from Teen Magazine that explained what I should eat, a meal plan for each day, measured in cups and ounces. My mother and I read the meal plan together and calculated how to adapt it to my grandmother's cooking. I pushed away the bag of potato chips at lunch. I stopped buying candy when I went on an errand. I made Jell-O so I would have something low-calorie to eat when the rest of the family ate dessert. Mom dieted with me. No more cheese crackers after dinner. No more ice cream cones. No more Klondikes. Grandmom shook her head with disapproval. She and I were shopping one afternoon, and as we walked past Potomac Bakery, she said, "Let's go in and see what they have." "Grandmom," I said, "you know I'm on a diet." She rolled her eyes. "That's ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with you. You're too young. It's not healthy." There was really no point in arguing with her, so we went into the little room filled with the scent of butter and sugar, the glass cases filled with rows of chocolatey, doughy discs and caramel-colored squares, pies bulged with berries or sported caps of meringue, cakes round and glistening with cream. Smiling women wearing hairnets and smudged aprons greeted us with recognition and affection. They offered me a cookie as they had done for years and seemed dismayed when I said no. "She's on a diet," Grandmom said with an eye roll and a tone of disgust. The bakery ladies were aghast. Grandmom took what it seemed like an inordinate amount of time to choose chocolate eclairs, one of my favorite. I stood with my arms crossed over my chest and my jaw locked in grim rejection of what was now forbidden pleasure. That night at dinner, Grandmom put the eclairs on the table, and at the beginning of the meal, not a traditional act. In a nightly ritual, let me read that last line again. That night at dinner, Grandmom put the eclairs on the table at the beginning of the meal, not a traditional act. In a nightly ritual, my grandmother poured a cup of tea and passed it to me. I passed it to my mother. She passed it to my grandfather. Then grandmother poured another cup and passed it to me. I passed it to my mother. That night, with each pass, Grandma pushed the eclair toward me and I pushed it back. The eclair slid back and forth through the passing of the main course and every side dish. I finished eating and asked to be excused. My mother said yes. My grandmother said nothing. No one ate that eclair. It sat in a box in the kitchen for a week. Every time I looked at it, I felt powerful. I was telling my grandmother that I was going to make my own choices. But I didn't think about what choices about food might mean. You have to have more than enough to refuse to eat. To refuse to eat a treat from my grandmother, a woman who had worried that her family would have enough to eat through the Depression era, was like being ungrateful for the fact that we had more than enough, and we still didn't have a lot of money. One thing the grandmother could give us that was special food. I was turning down that gift, but I wanted to eat like a Teen Magazine girl. I did my leg lifts and sit-ups while I watched TV. I lost weight. I learned about that perverse power that is born in the puritanical ethic of self-denial. I learned about the social approval a woman gets for disappearing and controlling her desires. I learned that to be beautiful is to be thin, and I learned about the power of beauty. Pictures of me from that time are pictures of a young woman who has found her power. I am posing like a teen model, rarely smiling since I had braces, but obviously pleased with myself. But my self-esteem wasn't substantive. It would sway with the arrow on the scale. Fortunately, I had my grandmother's disapproval of weight loss. Her self-confidence and her acceptance of her body and my body had taken root as a kind of arrogance in me. Some part of me believed her when she said there was nothing wrong with my body. And now, wanting to support my mother when she sat at the table with a can of Metrical and being able to say no to an eclair myself, took a shape of its own and wound around that root. Choices about food were an expression of something complex and not clear. I was in a house of mirrors. Patty, Patty. There was a picture of the Nixon family on one of the commemorative plates hanging in our dining room. One day I noticed that I was going to change my name from Patty to Tish. I chose that name after hours of looking at the picture of Tricia Nixon while I ate my meals. Tricia Nixon had a tidy flip hairstyle and a big smile. She looked self-contained and confident. My family wasn't totally happy about the idea, but I stopped answering to the name Patty. I arrived in St. Louis that summer dressed in knee-length pale blue shorts and a horizontal blue striped shirt. Aunt June was filled with compliments when she met me at the airport. While we drove to Fredericktown, she told me her version of my parents' divorce. She thought my parents had been emotionally immature. Grandmother had temporarily disowned my father in the years after the divorce. No matter how much his mother disapproved of my mother, divorce was worse. And at the end of this discussion of my parents' immaturity, the pressures of two dominant, opinionated mothers, and the way life goes, my aunt asked if I'd like to meet my father. My first question was, is he alive? It was a quip. I knew he was alive. I also knew that this was a big deal. I couldn't sort through all my feelings. I did want to meet him, but I wasn't sure if my mom would want me to meet him. Aunt June assured me that Mom knew. She said I could say no. She also said he was on his way. I didn't feel like I could say no. And I wasn't sure I wanted to say no. The only picture of my father that I had ever seen was the one in the bedroom dresser. The picture of the handsome young man that glittered in the moonlight. The icon of love deferred. When he walked in the door, I saw an older man with less hair, a comb-over, and potbelly. He lived in Texas now, and he was tanned from the southern sun. He wore a casual yellow golf shirt and pressed gray linen pants. He had a laid-back manner and a thick Texas accent. My aunts and grandmother were giddy. All eyes were on me. I sucked in my stomach and tried to appear calm, but my heart was pounding. He didn't look like his picture or President Kennedy, but he was beautiful. His eyes were so brown and his smile so slight. We didn't race towards each other. We stood, each of us waiting for the other. I reached out and took his hand. "It's very nice to meet you," I said in a wobbly but formal tone. He smiled and gave my hand a squeeze. "Well, it's very nice to meet you too," he drawled. I backed away, somewhat transfixed by his charm, but too nervous to be close to him. There was a large dinner full of his favorite foods: fried chicken, sliced tomatoes, bananas rolled in mayonnaise, and then in peanuts. We all ate and talked about his drive. Grandma was smiling and talking in a more animated manner than I have ever seen. After dinner, she brought out albums of old photographs. Dad and I looked at pictures of my childhood and made tentative conversation. The aunts and my grandmother filled in details. It was a get-to-know-you marathon. The next day, he took me for a ride. He wanted to say hi to some friends around town. We stopped in shops and restaurants and gas stations. Everyone seemed so happy to see him. They all commented on how much I looked like him. I was used to being told how much I looked like my mother, but maybe Patty looked like her. Now I was Tish. It was true, I had the Parmalee beauty mark. He seemed to understand something. I was desperate to know. He understood how to make friends. Let me say that one again, too. He seemed to understand something I was desperate to know. He understood how to make friends. In one store, he bought me a blue record player and a Beatles album, Meet the Beatles. He had me. God the Father had been replaced. When I returned home that summer, there was a shift in my relationship with my mother. I tried not to reveal how much I liked my dad, but I was sitting there with a blue record player and Meet the Beatles. I was bringing home my father and 4 men with long hair and musical instruments. My mother tried to appear happy that I was happy, but she didn't like the music. She had said no to troll dolls and bubble rings and socks with no shoes, but she went to work every day and bought me a piano and paid for piano lessons. My dad bought me pop culture. I returned to school that day with a new name, a new body, and a newly internalized father. Boys seemed to look at me differently. Girls wanted to be my friend. Hi, my name is Tish.